The discovery was not a dramatic, heart-pounding affair. It was quiet. It was mundane. Mark was looking for a spare charging cable, rummaging through the back of Amelia's top dresser drawer, a space she usually kept meticulously organized but had recently become a repository for forgotten trinkets and impulse buys. His fingers brushed against something smooth and unfamiliar, nestled beneath a tangle of silk scarves. It was a phone, not her sleek, pearlescent white phone that was currently charging on her nightstand, but a cheaper, black, anonymous-looking device. He pulled it out. The screen was dark. A cold, heavy certainty settled in his stomach, a feeling that displaced all other thoughts. This was it. The answer to the questions he hadn't allowed himself to fully form. The explanation for the late-night work emergencies, the sudden, secretive smiles at her screen, the emotional distance that had grown from a crack into a chasm between them. He pressed the power button. A low battery icon flashed and died. Of course, it would be just his luck for the truth to be locked behind a dead battery. He took the cable he'd been looking for, the one for her actual phone, and plugged it into the second one. It fit. The irony was not lost on him. He set it down gently behind a stack of sweaters in his own closet, a silent promise to be dealt with later. He didn't feel rage. Not yet. He felt a profound and chilling clarity, as if a dense fog he'd been walking through for months had suddenly evaporated, revealing a sheer cliff edge just inches from his feet. He had thought their problems were about a lack of communication, about the stress of his supposedly failing architecture practice. He didn't know the problem was a second life, a second narrative hidden in a drawer. Within a week, the foundation of their world would be demolished, and only one of them would be left standing on solid ground. And what did you think? Did you feel that chill run down your spine, that moment of cold recognition? We've all had moments where we suspected something was wrong, but finding the proof, that's a different story. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love to see how far our stories travel. If you're enjoying this so far, do us a favor and hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of truth and consequences. Now, let's get back to Mark and the storm that was about to break. The phone charged in the darkness of his closet, a sleeping serpent. For 2 days, Mark didn't touch it. He went about his life with a surreal sense of detachment, observing Amelia as if she were a character in a play for which he had already read the final, tragic act. He saw the way she'd check her own phone, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes, before remembering the real conversation was happening elsewhere. He saw the condescending pity she gave him when he mentioned a setback with a building permit for a small residential project he was supposedly working on. "Oh, honey," she'd said, patting his hand without making eye contact, her attention on a catalog for a new luxury SUV. "Don't worry. We'll get by. Daddy can always help out if things get too tight." He said he might even have a junior drafting position open at his firm if you decide to pursue something more stable. The humiliation was a familiar flavor, a bitter meal he'd been served countless times. Her father, Richard Beaumont, was a titan of commercial real estate, a man who built gleaming, soulless towers and believed a man's worth was written on his bank statement. In his eyes, Mark, the small-time architect with his quaint focus on sustainable design and community spaces, was a charity case his daughter had saddled herself with. He was the artistic husband, a charming but ultimately useless accessory to the Beaumont family's wealth and influence. They thought his quiet nature was a sign of weakness, his patience a symptom of his lack of ambition. They were wrong. That evening, they went to a dinner party at the home of one of Amelia's friends. The house was a monument to ostentatious wealth, all glass and white marble, a place designed to be photographed rather than lived in. The conversation, as always, revolved around money, acquisitions, and the failings of those who had less. Mark stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, nursing a glass of sparkling water, a ghost at the feast. "Mark, darling, come here," Amelia called, her voice tinkling with false affection. He walked over to the circle of her friends, their faces a gallery of bored, wealthy women. "I was just telling Sandra about your little project. The one for the community garden." Sandra, a woman with a face pulled so tight it looked painful, gave him a look of profound disinterest. "Oh, How quaint. He's so passionate about it. Amelia continued, her words a masterclass in passive aggression. He spends hours designing these little benches and planter boxes. It's not exactly building skyscrapers like Daddy, but it keeps him busy, doesn't it, sweetie? The other women offered thin, pitying smiles. In their world, a man who wasn't aggressively climbing a corporate ladder was a failure. A man who found satisfaction in small, meaningful work was an oddity to be patronized. Mark felt the familiar heat rise in his cheeks, the urge to defend himself, to scream the truth of his life at them. But that wasn't his way. Strategy required patience. Vengeance was a dish best served cold, and his was currently sitting in a dark closet, slowly gathering power. He reached into his pocket, his fingers closing around a small, cool piece of metal. It was a key, a simple, unadorned brass key. It didn't belong to their house, or his car, or the small, rented office space he used as a front. It belonged to a sprawling 10,000-square-foot studio in the city's most innovative design district. It was the key to the headquarters of Helix Collaborative, a firm that was at that very moment finalizing a 9-figure contract to design a new National Museum of Technology. His little project wasn't a community garden. It was a multi-million-dollar urban renewal initiative funded by a philanthropic trust he had established himself. His struggling practice was a carefully constructed fiction, a shield he had put up years ago when he realized Amelia and her family measured love in dollars and respect in square footage. He had wanted her to love him for who he was, not for what he had. And now, he had his answer. The key felt heavy in his hand, a tangible piece of the truth they were all blind to. He met Amelia's patronizing gaze and gave her a small, calm smile. It's rewarding work, he said softly. The storm was coming, and he would be the one holding the lightning. The next morning, while Amelia was at a spin class, a ritual she attended with the fervor of a religious zealot, Mark retrieved the second phone. It was fully charged. He took it to his small, rented office, the one Amelia thought represented the entirety of his professional world. It was a sparse, unimpressive space, deliberately so. It had a drafting table, a laptop, and a few architectural models for minor projects. This was his stage, the set for the role of the struggling artist. He sat down, took a deep breath, and turned on the phone. There was no password. The hubris was breathtaking. She hadn't even considered the possibility of being discovered. The home screen was generic, but the message icon showed over 1,000 unread notifications. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat in a quiet room. He opened the app. The conversations were primarily with one contact, saved under the name A for architect, he presumed. A bitter, ironic twist. The man's name, he would soon learn, was Alex. He was a partner at a rival firm, one known for its aggressive, flashy designs, the very kind of soulless architecture Richard Beaumont admired. Mark didn't read chronologically. He scrolled back months, then a year. The affair had been going on for almost 2. The initial messages were flirtatious, then quickly became explicit. That was a blow, but it was the conversations that followed that truly hollowed him out. They weren't about passion or love. They were about logistics. They were about money. "He's so pathetic," one of Amelia's messages read, dated 6 months prior. He was excited today because he got a commission for a house extension. A house extension. I swear, it's like being married to a child. Don't worry, though. Daddy's lawyers are already looking at the prenup. The moment his little business officially goes under, I'm done. I can't be tied to a failure. Another from Alex. Just hold on a little longer. Once that big city center bid goes through for my firm, we'll have more than enough. You won't have to pretend to be interested in his little doodles anymore. Mark felt a cold fury settle over him. It wasn't the fiery rage of a betrayed husband. It was the icy, calculating anger of a master strategist seeing the enemy's entire battle plan laid out. They were mocking him, pitying him, and plotting to leave him with what they assumed would be nothing. The prenup. She had insisted on it when they got married, a document her father's lawyers had drafted. At the time, she'd framed it as a modern, sensible precaution. "It's just to protect my family trust, honey," she had said. "It's not about us, Mark had agreed without a fight. He had his own lawyers review it, of course. They had noted its ironclad nature. In the event of a divorce, all assets and businesses owned prior to the marriage, and any wealth generated by them, would remain the sole property of the original owner. At the time, Amelia and her father believed this protected her inheritance and his future earnings. They had no idea that Helix Collaborative had been founded 3 years before Mark even met Amelia. The prenup was not her shield. It was his. He spent the next 2 hours meticulously photographing every single conversation with his own phone, creating a digital dossier of her betrayal. He saw their plans for romantic getaways disguised as business trips. He saw her sending Alex photos of Mark's pathetic design sketches, which the two of them would then ridicule. He saw her discussing her father's plan to absorb Mark's failed business for pennies on the dollar, a move of corporate pity. His hands were steady. His breathing was even. The emotional shock had been processed and filed away. Now, there was only the plan. He called David Shun, his lawyer, and one of the few people on earth who knew the full extent of his success. David was not just a lawyer. He was a friend, a brilliant legal mind with the disposition of a shark. "David," Mark said, his voice level. "It's time." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then David's voice, low and serious. "Are you sure, Mark? Once we start this, there's no going back." Mark looked at a photo on his phone, a message from Amelia to Alex, sent just last week. "He's so quiet lately. I think he's finally realized he's out of his depth. It's almost sad. I'll give it another month, tops." "I'm sure," Mark replied, a sliver of ice in his tone. "She's giving it another month. I'm giving her until Saturday." The days leading up to Saturday were a masterclass in self-control. Mark moved through his life with an unnerving calm, a quiet observer in his own home. Amelia, completely oblivious, mistook his silence for depression, a symptom of his professional failures. Her condescension softened into a cloying, theatrical pity. She would leave articles on his desk about finding a new career path after 40, or suggest he take up a hobby to improve his mood. Each gesture was a small twist of a knife, yet Mark felt nothing. He was a surgeon, observing a disease he was about to excise. He was beyond pain. His real work was happening in the background, a silent, efficient demolition of the life they had built. He and David had a series of encrypted video calls. They reviewed the prenup, cross-referencing it with the incorporation documents for Helix Collaborative and the detailed financial statements from the past 5 years. The numbers were staggering, a fortress of wealth that Amelia and her family had no idea even existed. They prepared the paperwork, drafted the official separation agreement, and compiled the evidence. The photos of the text messages were organized into a neat, undeniable timeline of deceit. Meanwhile, Amelia's confidence soared. She was on the cusp of what she believed was her liberation. Her conversations with Alex on the second phone became more brazen. They were planning a trip to Bali to celebrate once she had finally left Mark. "He won't even fight it," she texted Alex on Thursday evening, while Mark sat in the same room, supposedly sketching in his notebook, but actually finalizing the asset distribution list with David via a secure messaging app. "He'll probably just be relieved that I'm not his problem anymore. Daddy's offered to buy his company's assets for $10,000. It's more than they're worth, honestly. A charity buyout." Mark read the message later that night, a copy forwarded by his own software that now mirrored the second phone's activity. A $10,000 charity buyout for a company secretly valued at over $400 million. The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it was almost impressive. They hadn't just underestimated him. They had created a fictional version of him, a pathetic caricature, and they were basing all their plans on that fiction. Friday arrived. It was the night of the Beaumont family's weekly dinner, a mandatory command performance at Richard and Eleanor's palatial estate. These dinners were Mark's personal Calvary, a ritual humiliation where he was the designated court jester. He usually dreaded them, but tonight he felt a strange sense of anticipation. It was the final act. He dressed carefully, not in the worn corduroys and soft sweaters Amelia despised, but in a perfectly tailored dark gray suit, a crisp white shirt, and a simple, elegant tie. It was a suit from one of his business trips to Milan, a trip Amelia thought had been a desperate, failed attempt to find clients. When he came downstairs, she stared at him, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. "Wow, you clean up nicely. Trying to impress Daddy?" Something like that, Mark said, his voice placid. The dinner was exactly as he expected, only more so. Richard Beaumont, a man whose personality was as loud as his diamond pinky ring, held court at the head of the massive mahogany table. He spent the first hour boasting about a recent acquisition, a story designed to highlight his own genius and, by extension, Mark's insignificance. Finally, over dessert, Richard turned his full, overbearing attention to Mark. "So, Mark," he began, his tone dripping with magnanimity, "Amelia tells me things are a bit slow. Not surprising in this economy for the little guys. No shame in it." Mark met his father-in-law's gaze. He didn't speak. He simply waited. "Look," Richard continued, leaning forward as if imparting a great secret. "I've been thinking. I run a tight ship, but I'm a family man. I've created a position for you at Beaumont Properties, junior project manager. It's mostly paperwork, overseeing small tenant improvements, but it's a steady paycheck. A real job. It'll give you some security, some dignity. What do you say?" Eleanor, Amelia's mother, beamed. "Oh, Richard, that's so generous." Amelia looked at Mark, an expectant, triumphant gleam in her eye. This was it. The moment of his final surrender, the official acknowledgement of his failure and her family's magnanimous rescue. Mark slowly placed his fork down. The clink of silver against porcelain was the only sound in the suddenly silent room. He looked at Richard, then at Eleanor, and finally at his wife. He saw the smug satisfaction on their faces, the absolute certainty of their position. He had absorbed their insults, their pity, their contempt for years. He had endured it all, waiting for the right moment. This was that moment, the final piece of evidence, the last grievance for his list. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. A strange, serene smile touched his lips. "Thank you for the offer, Richard. It's very illuminating." He then turned to his wife, his voice dropping to a quiet, intimate level that was somehow more menacing than a shout. "Amelia, we need to talk when we get home." The drive back to their house was shrouded in a thick, uncomfortable silence. Amelia, for the first time, seemed unsettled. Mark's calm was abnormal. It wasn't the defeated resignation she had expected after her father's generous offer. It was something else, something unreadable and unnerving. She tried to break the tension with a light, chiding tone. "You were very rude to Daddy, you know," she said, staring out the passenger window. "He was trying to help you. You could have at least shown a little gratitude." Mark didn't respond. He just drove, his hands steady on the wheel. The city lights streaked past, painting fleeting patterns on his impassive face. When he pulled into the driveway of their beautiful, architect-designed home, a home Mark had designed himself, a fact Amelia often forgot to mention, he turned off the engine, but made no move to get out. "What is wrong with you tonight?" Amelia demanded, her voice rising with irritation. "You've been acting strange all week. If this is about Daddy's offer, you need to get over it. It's a good opportunity for you, for us." Mark finally turned to look at her. The streetlights cast half of his face in shadow, but his eyes were clear and bright. "The conversation isn't about your father's offer, Amelia. The conversation is about us." "Oh, God," she sighed, rolling her eyes. "Are you going to get all emotional now? I'm tired, Mark. Can we not do this tonight?" "We're doing this tonight," he said, his voice so devoid of emotion it was chilling. He got out of the car, and she followed, a sense of dread beginning to prickle at the edges of her annoyance. Inside, the house was quiet. Mark didn't turn on all the lights, leaving the grand, open-plan living room in a state of twilight. He walked over to the fireplace and stood before it, his back to her. "I'm waiting," she said, crossing her arms. "If you have something to say, say it." He turned around slowly. "Ido, I've been doing a lot of thinking lately. About things you've said, things we've done. I think it's important to be clear about them." He began to speak, his voice calm and measured, like a narrator recounting a history. "3 years ago, when I proposed, You told me my ambition was one of the things you loved most about me. 2 years ago, at your parents' anniversary party, you told your friends my artistic temperament meant I wasn't built for real success. You thought I couldn't hear you. Amelia's defensive posture stiffened. I don't know what you're talking about. Last year, he continued, ignoring her interruption, when I won the regional award for residential design, you called it a cute little prize and spent the entire evening talking to a real estate developer about his new condo tower. 6 months ago, you told me I should consider giving up my hobby and getting a real job because my dreams were becoming a financial liability for you. 3 days ago, you called my life's work little doodles. He took a step closer. She could see the cold fire in his eyes now. At every turn, for the last 3 years, you have systematically chipped away at my confidence, mocked my ambition, and treated my passion as a character flaw. You have treated me not as a partner, but as a project, a failed project you were getting ready to abandon. That's not true, she snapped, her voice sharp with indignation. I've been nothing but supportive. I stood by you while your business was failing. I've been patient. My God, my father just offered you a job to save you from complete humiliation, and this is the thanks we get. Supportive? Mark let out a short, hollow laugh. You think that was support? That was condescension, Amelia. It was pity. It was all based on a lie. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the silent room. You've been so busy pitying the man you thought I was. You never once bothered to see the man I actually am. Amelia stared at him, her face a mask of confusion and anger. She was still on her own chessboard, playing a game he had already abandoned. She thought this was a fight about his hurt feelings, his wounded pride. She had no idea it was a coronation. What is that supposed to mean? She spat. Are you drunk? Mark's calm finally broke, but not into rage. Instead, a look of profound, weary sadness crossed his face. I think it means we're done here. He walked over to the sleek, minimalist media console and picked up the remote. He wasn't turning on a movie. He was changing the entire channel of their lives. Amelia's anger surged, a predictable and potent defense mechanism. We're done when I say we're done. You don't get to decide that. After everything I've put up with, after all the embarrassment of being married to a man who can't even support himself, you think you can just end this? She laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. You have nothing, Mark. What are you going to do? Move into your sad little office? Don't be ridiculous. My sad little office, Mark repeated, his voice quiet again. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw a complete stranger. A woman so blinded by her own arrogance that she couldn't see the abyss opening at her feet. You're right. I won't be moving in there. He turned his back to her and reached into the pocket of his suit jacket. He pulled out the second phone. The moment she saw it, every trace of color drained from her face. Her mask of indignant fury dissolved into pure, unadulterated panic. The cheap, black plastic case was as damning as a signed confession. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The verbal chess match was over. This was checkmate. No password, Mark said, his voice laced with a cold disappointment that was far more cutting than any anger. That was careless, Amelia. Or maybe just arrogant. Mark, I can explain, she stammered, taking a step back. Her mind was racing, desperately trying to construct a plausible lie, but the evidence was right there in his hand. Can you? He asked, his tone genuinely curious. Can you explain the 1,247 messages to I assume that stands for Alex. Alex Thorne, your father's favorite architect. He didn't look at the phone. He didn't need to. He had memorized the most damning parts. He began to recite them, his voice a dispassionate monotone. August 14th. He's so pathetic. He was excited today because he got a commission for a house extension September 2nd. Don't worry. Daddy's lawyers are already looking at the prenup. The moment his little business officially goes under, I'm done October 11th. A picture of my design for the Miller residence, followed by your message. Look at this garbage. He calls this architecture, and Alex's reply, my intern could do better. Each word was a hammer blow, systematically demolishing the facade of her life. She sank onto the arm of the sofa, her body trembling. Mark, please. It wasn't what it looks like. We were just talking. And my personal favorite, Mark continued, relentless. From last week. He's so quiet lately. I think he's finally realized he's out of his depth. It's almost sad. I'll give it another month. Tops, you were giving me another month, Amelia. You were planning to leave me after you and your father picked over the bones of what you thought was my failed life. He finally looked up from the phone, his eyes locking onto hers. The affair, that's one thing. It's a betrayal, and it's ugly. But this, he gestured around the room at the life they had built. This contempt, the idea that you have been tolerating me, pitying me, waiting for me to fail so you could leave with a clear conscience that is unforgivable. So what now? She whispered, her voice cracking. You going to leave me? Where will you go? What will you do? The questions were still laced with the assumption of his powerlessness. That's the part you've never understood, Mark said. He pointed the TV remote at the massive 80-inch screen that hung on the wall like a black mirror. He pressed a button. The screen flickered to life, not with a cable channel, but with a web browser. On the screen, in stunning high definition, was the homepage of a website. The logo was a sleek, stylized HC. The name below it read, Helix Collaborative. The page was a cascade of breathtaking images, a sweeping, silver-skinned museum that seemed to defy gravity, a futuristic university library built from glass and reclaimed wood, a stunning corporate headquarters that cascaded down a mountainside like a waterfall of steel and light. It was a portfolio of architectural genius, projects on a scale that dwarfed anything Beaumont Properties had ever conceived. Amelia stared at the screen, her brow furrowed in confusion. What is this? Mark navigated to the About Us page. A series of professional headshots appeared. The team was diverse, brilliant-looking. And at the very top, under the title Founding Principal and Chief Design Architect, was a picture of him. It was a professional photo, one she had never seen, showing him looking confident, authoritative, and successful. The biography beneath it detailed his education. MIT, not the state school he'd told her about, and a list of international awards that made his cute little regional prize seem like a joke. That's not possible, she breathed, shaking her head in denial. This is some kind of joke. It's not a joke, Amelia, Mark said, his voice soft. He clicked on in the press section. Article headlines from major architectural journals and financial news outlets filled the screen. Helix Collaborative wins bid for National Museum. The quiet genius reimagining urban spaces. Mark Hanson's Helix valued at over $400 million after new tech campus deal. The numbers, the headlines, the images, they all swam before Amelia's eyes, a dizzying collage of a reality she had refused to see. The struggling artist, the pathetic failure she had pitted and planned to discard, was a lie. A carefully constructed, long-term lie. The man she thought she was propping up was the one holding the entire world in his hands. The blood drained from her face as the final, devastating realization hit her. She wasn't the one with the power. She never had been. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by her own ragged breathing as the empire of her arrogance crumbled into dust around her. Amelia's shock morphed with sickening speed into a desperate, frantic calculation. The woman who, moments before, had been dripping with contempt, now looked at Mark with wide, pleading eyes. The predator had become the prey, and she was scrambling for survival. Mark, honey, she began, her voice a syrupy, unnatural croon. She stood up and tried to walk toward him, her hands outstretched. I don't understand. Why would you hide all of this from me? Mark took a deliberate step back, a small, simple movement that was as final as a door slamming shut. Why do you think, Amelia? I wanted to be loved for who I am, not for a bank statement. I wanted a partner, not a parasite who would stick around as long as the host was viable. You failed the test. Spectacularly. No, she cried, the sound raw and panicked. No, that's not it. I always believed in you. I was just pushing you. I knew you had this in you. I was trying to motivate you. Tough love. That's all it was. The lie was so transparent, so pathetic, it was almost insulting. Mark just shook his head slowly, a look of profound pity on his face. You weren't motivating me, Amelia. You were mocking me. There's a difference. You didn't believe in me. You believed in your father's money and Alex's flashy career. You saw me as a temporary burden. The only thing you miscalculated was the size of my wallet. Her face crumbled. The tears that came were real, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of pure, unadulterated loss. She wasn't mourning their marriage. She was mourning the future she had just seen vanish from the television screen. The museum, the tech campus, the $400 million valuation. She was mourning a lifestyle that had been within her grasp, a lifestyle she had arrogantly thrown away because she'd been looking in the wrong direction. "We can fix this," she pleaded, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Mark, we can fix this. Forget Alex. He was a mistake, a stupid distraction. Think about us. Think about what we could be now that this is all out in the open. We could be a true power couple. You and me. We'll show them all. We'll show my father." It was at that moment her phone, her real phone, buzzed on the counter. She glanced at it. The screen lit up with a name. Daddy. She had sent him a panicked, one-line text moments ago. "Problem. Call me. Don't answer it," Mark said, his voice a low warning. But she was desperate. Her father had always been her solution, her fixer. She snatched the phone and answered, putting it on speaker, a subconscious, foolish attempt to bring her most powerful ally into the fight. "Daddy." "Amelia? What's going on? What's this about a problem?" Richard Beaumont's booming voice filled the room, impatient and demanding. "It's Mark," she sobbed. He's leaving me. He's throwing me out." There was a sputtering sound on the other end of the line. "He's what? That ungrateful little. After I just offer him a job? He has no right. Put him on the phone. Now." Amelia held the phone out to Mark, a silent plea. He simply shook his head. "He won't talk to me," she cried into the phone. "Listen to me, you worthless parasite," Richard bellowed, his voice distorted with rage. "I don't know what kind of fantasy world you're living in, but you have nothing. You are nothing without my daughter. I will bury you. I will buy your pathetic little company for scrap and turn your office into a storage closet. I will call every supplier, every contractor in this city. You will never work again. Do you understand me?" The threats hung in the air, loud and impotent. In the past, they would have terrified Mark. Now they were just noise. As Richard paused to draw breath for his next tirade, the doorbell rang. The sound was crisp and clear in the tense silence. Amelia jumped. "Who's that?" Mark didn't answer. He walked to the door and opened it. Standing on the porch, silhouetted against the night, was a man in a sharp, dark suit, holding a leather briefcase. It was David Chun. He stepped inside, his calm, intelligent eyes taking in the scene in a single glance. Amelia, tear-streaked and panicked, the phone in her hand still broadcasting Richard's sputtering fury. Mark, standing composed by the door. "Am I interrupting?" David asked, his voice the epitome of calm professionalism. "Who the hell is that?" Richard roared through the phone. "That," Mark said, finally speaking, "is my lawyer." The arrival of David Chun shifted the room's atmosphere from a messy domestic dispute to a formal execution. David walked calmly into the center of the living room, placing his briefcase on the heavy oak coffee table. He clicked it open with two sharp, definitive snaps. The sound seemed to cut right through Richard Beaumont's blustering on the phone. "Mr. Beaumont," David said, his voice clear and precise, addressing the phone in Amelia's trembling hand. "My name is David Chun. I am lead counsel for the Helix Collaborative and for Mr. Mark Hansen personally. I would advise you to stop talking immediately. Every threat you're making is being recorded and is, I assure you, entirely baseless." There was a stunned silence from the phone. Richard, for perhaps the first time in his life, was at a loss for words. "Helix what?" He finally managed to sputter. "Helix Collaborative," David repeated patiently. "Perhaps you've heard of them? They were your primary competitor for the city center redevelopment project, and they won. They are also the silent majority partner in the investment group that recently acquired Sterling REIT, which, if I'm not mistaken, holds the mortgage on two of your largest commercial properties. I'd be careful about making threats, Mr. Beaumont. Your ship has more holes in it than you know." Amelia looked from the phone to David, her face a canvas of dawning horror. The web was far larger and more complex than she could have ever imagined. David turned his attention from the phone to her. His gaze was not unkind, but it was utterly devoid of pity. "Amelia," he said, his tone softening slightly, "Mark has been very clear about his intentions. This marriage is over." "You can't just throw me out," she shrieked, finding her voice again. "This is my home. I have rights." "Actually," David said, pulling a sheaf of papers from his briefcase, "you don't. This house was purchased outright by Mr. Hanson 2 years before your marriage. As per the prenuptial agreement that your father's own legal team drafted, it remains his sole and separate property." He slid the document across the table. "It was the prenup. Your father's lawyers did an excellent job of protecting premarital assets. At the time, they believed they were protecting your future inheritance. In reality, they were protecting the entirety of the Helix Collaborative, which was founded 3 years before you met Mark." He let that sink in, then produced another file. "We also have extensive, time-stamped evidence of infidelity, as well as communications indicating a conspiracy to commit fraud by timing your departure from the marriage to what you believed would be Mr. Hanson's financial ruin. In short, if you choose to contest this, you will walk away with nothing, and you will be countersued for damages." However, he slid another, much thinner document across the table. "Mark is a generous man. He is willing to offer you this. A one-time settlement payment of $500,000, contingent on you signing this non-disclosure agreement and vacating the premises within the hour. It's far more than you're legally entitled to, which is, to be precise, nothing. $500,000. To the woman she had been an hour ago, it would have been an insult. To the woman she was now, it was a lifeline, and a paltry one compared to the hundreds of millions that had just been snatched from her grasp. "An hour," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Where am I supposed to go?" Mark spoke for the first time since David's arrival. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of finality. "You could call Alex, or you could call your father. I'm sure he has a guest room." The cruelty of the suggestion, delivered so calmly, was devastating. Her affair and her family alliance, the 2 pillars of her secret life, were now offered up as her only refuge. Then, Mark gestured toward the grand entryway. Standing just inside the door, where they had been placed by a service Mark had called hours ago, were 2 large, expensive-looking suitcases. Her suitcases. They were packed with her most valuable clothes, shoes, and jewelry. "Your bags are packed," he said. The 4 words landed with the force of a physical blow. It was real. It was happening. That night, Amelia stared at the suitcases on the pristine lawn of the home she no longer had a claim to. The front door had closed behind her with a soft, final click. The sound echoed the closing of a chapter, the end of a life. She was outside, and he was inside. The reversal was absolute. She stood there, shivering in the cool night air, the settlement papers clutched in one hand and her phone in the other. She had tried to argue, to plead, to bargain, but David Chun had been a wall of polite, implacable logic, and Mark had been a ghost, already departed from their shared existence. She scrolled through her contacts, her thumb hovering over Daddy. She imagined his apoplectic rage, followed by the humiliating, "I told you." So she imagined the cold comfort of a guest room in the house where she grew up, a regression to childhood status under the thumb of a father who had just been publicly neutered by the son-in-law he despised. She scrolled further, her thumb stopping on Alex, her partner in crime, her supposed future. She pressed the call button. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice warm and intimate. "Hey, you. Couldn't wait." "Alex," she said, her voice choked. "It's over. Mark knows everything. He threw me out." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. The warmth in his voice evaporated, replaced by a cautious chill. "What do you mean? He knows everything." "Everything. The phone, the texts, you, all of it. He kicked me out, Alex. I'm standing on the lawn with my suitcases." She waited for him to say, "I'm coming to get you," for him to say, "Don't worry. We'll face this together." Instead, he said, "Did you get a settlement? What did he give you?" The question was so cold, so nakedly transactional, it stunned her. "What?" "The money. Amelia," he said, his voice tight with irritation. "The prenup. What did you walk away with?" He offered me 500,000, she stammered. Alex let out a harsh, bitter laugh. 500,000? That's it? After all this? What do you mean, that's it? She asked, a new, terrifying dread creeping in. Alex, there's something you don't know. Mark, he's not who we thought he was. He's rich, Alex. Incredibly rich. His company is worth hundreds of millions. Another silence, longer this time. When Alex finally spoke, his voice was flat and dead. You got to be kidding me. I'm not. I saw it. He has this huge company, Helix something. Helix Collaborative, Alex finished for her, his voice a horrified whisper. They've been crushing us for a year. They took the city sitter bid right out from under us. That was him. Your pathetic little husband was Mark Hansen. Yes, she whispered. And you're telling me, he said, his voice rising in disbelief and fury, that you were married to the most successful architect in the country, and you blew it for $500,000? You idiot. You absolute idiot. The insult hit her harder than anything Mark had said. This was her co-conspirator, her supposed partner, the man for whom she had risked everything. And he was calling her an idiot not for her infidelity, but for her failure to secure the prize. Where are you? She asked, her voice trembling. Can I come over? No, he said, the words sharp and final. No, you can't. I need to think. I need to call my lawyer. My firm has non-compete clauses with Helix. Being associated with you right now could ruin me. The line went dead. He had hung up on her. She stood there in the darkness, utterly alone. The two men she had banked her future on, her powerful father and her ambitious lover, had both been revealed as hollow in the face of Mark's quiet, hidden strength. They were attracted to power, and in the space of an hour, she had lost all of hers. Weeks later, the dust had settled, creating a new and unrecognizable landscape. Amelia had taken the settlement. She had no choice. She was living in a small, stylish, but soulless rental apartment downtown, a place that cost a third of her monthly allowance. The life of leisurely lunches, charity galas, and spa days was over. She had to get a job. She ended up working as a gallery assistant, a position she secured through one of her mother's reluctant phone calls. She, who had once pitted Mark for his little job, now spent her days selling overpriced art to people who used to be her peers. They would come in, their eyes flickering with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. She was a cautionary tale whispered about over cocktails. Her relationship with her parents was strained to the breaking point. Richard Beaumont could not forgive the humiliation. Not just the social humiliation, but the professional one. David Chin's words had been prophetic. The exposure of Mark Hansen as the head of Helix Collaborative had sent shockwaves through the industry. Richard's lenders, realizing his connection to the woman who had tried to defraud a major business partner, had called in his loans. He was forced to sell off 2 of his flagship properties at a loss just to stay afloat. His empire was diminished, his reputation tarnished. He looked at Amelia not with fatherly affection, but with the resentment of a king whose daughter had led the enemy through a secret gate into his castle. One rainy afternoon, Amelia showed up at the address for Helix Collaborative. It was an imposing, beautiful building in the heart of the city, a building Mark's firm had not only designed but also owned. She hadn't called. She knew he wouldn't see her, but she had to try. She gave her name to the receptionist, who looked at her with cool, professional disinterest. I'm sorry, Mr. Hansen's schedule is full for the foreseeable future. Please, Amelia said, the word costing her the last of her pride. Just tell him I'm here. He'll see me. But he didn't. Instead, 5 minutes later, Mark's assistant, a sharp, composed young woman, came down to the lobby. She handed Amelia a small, sealed envelope. Mr. Hansen asked me to give you this. Amelia's heart leaped with a sudden, desperate hope. Was it a note? An offer to talk? She tore it open. Inside was not a letter, but a check. It was for $10,000. In the memo line, 2 words were written, charity buyout. It was the exact amount her father had planned to offer for Mark's failed business. The insult was so precise, so elegantly cruel, it took her breath away. It was a final, dismissive gesture, A message that he was not only closing the book on their life together, but also paying her back for every ounce of her condescension. She looked up at the vast, light-filled atrium, at the people moving with purpose and energy, at the empire built by the man she had called a failure. And she finally understood. The problem wasn't the affair. The problem wasn't the money. The problem was that she had looked at a diamond and, because it was not yet cut and polished to her liking, had declared it to be worthless glass. She had thrown it away, only to watch it become the crown jewel in someone else's world. Her world. She turned and walked out of the building, the check for her dignity clutched in her hand, and disappeared into the rain. Months turned into a year. The city continued its relentless rhythm, and the story of Mark Hansen and Amelia Beaumont faded from gossip into memory. Mark was not a man who reveled in victory. The night he had packed Amelia's bags and sent her away, he had felt no joy, no triumphant glee. He had felt only a profound, hollow emptiness. The demolition of a life, even a false one, leaves a void. He stood now, not in the empty house he had since sold, but on the terrace of his new penthouse apartment, a space he had designed for himself. It was a masterpiece of quiet luxury, of warm woods and clean lines, with a view that swept across the entire city skyline. Below, the lights of the National Museum, his museum, glowed softly against the twilight. He had poured his energy not into revenge, but into creation. Helix Collaborative had soared, taking on projects that were not just profitable, but meaningful: hospitals, schools, public parks. He had found his purpose not in proving his worth to others, but in expressing it through his work. He never became cruel or petty. The $10,000 check had been David's idea, a final, legalistic closing of the circle that his lawyer had insisted was necessary. Mark had simply signed it. His justice was not in punishment, but in the quiet, undeniable truth of his own success and the peace he had found in his own integrity. He had learned that true strength isn't about displaying dominance or demanding respect. It is a quiet, internal certainty. It is the patience to build a foundation so solid that the storms of other people's arrogance can never shake it. The real victory was not Amelia's downfall, but his own liberation from the need for her approval. He was free. And so, we come to the end of our story. A tale not of revenge, but of rebalancing. It's a powerful reminder that a person's value is not determined by the judgment of others, especially those who are blinded by their own pride. True worth is intrinsic. It's built through patience, integrity, and a quiet dedication to one's own path. Arrogance builds castles of sand, but character builds fortresses of stone. What do you think? Was Mark's final gesture with the check a step too far, or was it the perfect poetic justice? We would love to read your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective is what makes this community so special. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If you found value in this story, please hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story. Until then, remember to build your own fortress and never let anyone else tell you what you are worth.